Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to Quantum Innovators Network, brought to you by the Sydney Quantum Academy. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, which are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Peter Turner. I'm the CEO of the Sydney Quantum Academy. SQA is a joint venture between 4 of the kind of major quantum active universities here in Sydney, Macquarie, UNSW, USyd, and UTS, along with the state government, mostly through the Office of the Chief Scientist. And the vision is building Australia's quantum economy. So we're not a research organization, but we support a lot of PhD scholarships, fellowships, outreach, undergrad students, summer studentships and things like that. And we also do outreach events such as this, the Quantum Innovators Network. So linking up the startup and investment community with the quantum community. As I say, welcome to September Quinn. Today we're very lucky to have Dr. Euan Allen, who's the Chief Technology Officer at startup Siloton. Siloton is not a quantum company in the purest sense of the word, but I don't know what words we use. We'll see which ones Euan uses, quantum inspired or quantum adjacent. But I think you'll hear the story about Euan and Alistair and the others at Siloton who came out of the quantum program at the University of Bristol, which I know quite well, to start this company doing, I guess, what we call classical tomography for Medtech. A little bit about Euan, and then I'll pass the floor over to you, Euan. Yes, Euan's CTO now at Siloton. He finished his PhD in the photonics group, the quantum photonics group at the University of Bristol in 2018. Euan, I think there was a postdoc in Bristol as well.
Yeah.
Before you got your Royal Academy of Engineering fellowship down the road at the University of Bath in 2021. And then Siloton was founded in, was it founded in 2020, I think?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
it's been rolling along. And then is it just this last year or so, Euan's been paused his fellowship in Bath to focus on Siloton full time as the CTO. I remember my PhD interview with Euan at University of Bristol back in 2014, was it?
Yeah,
so,
would have been.
It's personally pretty, I feel pretty good being able to introduce Euan to you in a situation such as this. So I'll over to you, Euan.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, good morning or good afternoon or evening, everybody. It's great to be here, and thank you for coming, and thank you to the Sydney Quantum Academy and Pete and company for arranging everything and for inviting me today. Yeah, sad I can't be there in person. I haven't yet made it across to Sydney, but maybe next year I can come back and give a talk. I will also flag in an unrelated comment that the Lions are touring, the British and Irish Lions are touring next year, Sydney. So I'll leave that with you, Pete, I guess. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Pete. Yeah, my name's Euan Allen. I'm a CTO at Siloton. Yeah, I guess a quantum person by background, but in a company which is quantum enabling or enabled, I think is the way we sometimes put it. So yeah, Siloton was founded a few years ago now by actually 2 people with a quantum background, and it's in the area of medical technology. And I guess the kind of spin I wanted to put on today as a maybe a slightly different thing from other people you might have to talk is that we kind of quantum people that started a broadly non-quantum company. It definitely takes inspiration from aspects of what we've done and utilizes lots of stuff we did. And I'll go into how we did that and why we did that and the kind of overlap between it as well. So I hope it's an interesting story. So yeah, generally Siloton so we're in medical device space or medical technology space, and we're actually focused on ophthalmology. So eye care is where we're looking. So one of the leading cause of sight loss in most developed nations is this disease called age-related macular degeneration, AMD. It's age-related, so the older you are, the higher, the more chance you have of getting the disease. And by the time you're age 60, you have a 1 in 4 chance of getting this disease. And what happens generally is that you get some fluid built up at the back of the eye in the retina, and it can kind of rupture the cells in that area of the eye, and it can slowly cause deterioration of sight loss and eventual blindness. And yeah, it's a very common disease in like I said, most developed nations. It's the most common cause of sight loss, and there's predicted to be about 300 million patients globally by 2040. So the disease at the moment doesn't have a cure. There's no cure to the disease. It's really just a managed disease. The way it works is that as you get this fluid built up at the back of the eye, at a certain point you need an injection, and it removes the fluid to stop those cells being damaged. It's an injection, directly into your eyebrow, so it's not great, but it's also really important to do so, because as soon as those cells do become damaged, you start to lose sight, and it's irreversible. So in general, you can't gain that sight back. So it's really critical to hit the point, to understand how the disease is progressing when that fluid is building up, so that you can get treatment as soon as possible to make sure that you don't lose sight. And there's an issue at the moment with workloads in hospital systems, particularly, for example, in the NHS here in the UK, but also general frequency with which people can be monitored means that actually people are losing sight because of the delays to diagnose their condition. So why is that happening in general? So the scans you do at the back of the eye are through a technique called optical coherence tomography. It's a white light interferometric technique, which basically provides a 3-dimensional image of the back of the eye. It's very similar to ultrasound, but it uses light instead. So the current systems will look like this picture on the left. So this is a current system which sits in clinic. They're about 40 kilos. They need a technician to operate them. They can cost anywhere between £50,000 to 120 plus, depending on what specs and mods you want on top of it. And it's basically really defined, or designed to be used not very frequently. And actually, it means that patients at the moment generally are scanned once a month or more. So with greater degree of freedom, greater delays, between those scans. And actually with AMD in particular, they find that the frequency of those isn't sufficient for some patients. So what are we doing at Siloton? So we're taking a technology called photonic integrated circuits, which was something that we had worked on during our PhDs, but is a general technology of taking bulk optics either in fiber or in lenses and mirrors, which sit in those bigger systems, and shrinking them down onto chips, which you see in the middle there. So those are 2 Siloton chips next to a British pound coin there, and that actually has a full OCT system on that device itself. So that gives you an idea of the scaling. So we can take about 80% of the optics of the OCT system and put it onto a device. And the benefits, so the chips are made in a very similar way to your electronic semiconductor chips. So wafer scale technology, mass manufacturable, very cheap, robust, because it's all sat in a single block of material. And it's also reconfigurable, so we can play some smart tricks. And what that enables is actually you take these very expensive human operated devices, and you can make something like our headset on the right. So that is what we're calling a personal eye scanning unit. It can be provided them in the home. So actually each patient that has AMD and needs to go through this monitoring cycle can actually take one home and monitor, going from monitoring maybe once every 1 or 2 months to actually monitoring a few times a week, and therefore catching that transition of when you need treatment much more readily. So that's the general focus of Siloton. So who are we and who's along for the ride? So yeah, you've met myself and my 2 co-founders, Alistair Price. So Alistair also did quantum work in Bristol. So we actually met during our PhD. So he worked on integrated photonics for QKD systems, and I worked on integrated photonics for sensing systems in general. And then Ben, our other co-founder on the right, I can go through where we met, but he has a background in medical physics in general. We've got about over a century of business experience on our board through both VCs. Stuart actually runs, he's one of our investors, but he runs a quantum focused investment fund. So he's been super useful, 25 years in experience. And then on our advisory panel, we've got a mixture of, so we've got 3 ophthalmologists, Denise, Jeff, and Winifred. They're all clinical ophthalmologists, they're eye doctors. Jeff also works on utilizing new technologies, in particular AI, for certain aspects of ophthalmology. And Rahela at the end is a computer scientist helping with some of the software work. So this is the kind of broad team that Siloton is made up of at the moment. Yeah, an idea of how we came to form. I know these are always interesting stories about how startups come together. So this is a long list of stuff we've done since forming. So we first really sat down. The actual seed of Siloton was Alistair and I were doing postdocs and fellowships in Bristol, and there's a fantastic program that used to exist called QTech, Quantum Technology Enterprise Center, in Bristol, and it was a year-long training program to really, it's kind of like a quantum MBA. And Alistair was keen to go through that, and I happened to sit next to him for a coffee, and we started talking about ideas and possible things, ideas he had for QTech, and some ideas I'd been thinking about, and that was really the kind of the seed which has slowly grown into Siloton. We actually, I guess one thing to flag is that we didn't spin out from the university, so we didn't take any IP that we had developed during our PhDs or postdocs. So it's actually all of the IP and all of the work that has led to that chip which I presented has really come from Siloton itself. So it's actually, yeah, it wasn't necessary for us to actually spin out from Bristol and have IP with us from PhD work we had done. Various other things, I guess. Maybe one unique thing. So we incorporated officially a month after COVID hit the UK, and then I spent, so this middle image on the left is my dining table in my Victorian house in the middle of Bristol, which was where our first demonstrator was built, and actually ended up being the limiting factor for our demonstrator was my Victorian floorboards, because every time I moved, the whole thing would misalign. But I at least got a chip OCT experiment working, and there's only been about 3 or 4 of those in the world. So so it's a good bit of fun to do during COVID when I was shut away with nothing else to do. Yeah, and since then we've had our first raise. We've actually got first bit of revenue as well, and various other bits and pieces along the way, which I won't go into. So an idea of why or how we ended up. So I guess one thing I didn't cover was actually how we ended up on OCT, and it was really that we had a few ideas, me and Alistair, when we came out, and Alistair obviously had this year of focus to try and knuckle down the area that we'd work in. And the initial ideas we have didn't seem that commercially viable. And so what we ended up with is actually just having a shopping list of things that we thought we were good at and things that we thought we could provide, and why we thought integrated photonics was also interesting generally as a concept. And we went round and spoke to a fair number of people, somewhere in the 3 figures, I think. And we spoke to Denise, one of our consultant ophthalmologists, and we said, you know, what do you want from your devices that you use? And she kind of reeled off 4 of the 5 things that we had written down. And the more we explored, and for her OCT systems, that is, and the more we explored it, the more it seemed viable, and also the overlap seemed quite relevant. So I guess for quantum stuff, you know, we'd basically spent lots of time making chips which were really, you know, where every photon matters, either in a QK system or a sensitive, you know, a sensing or a computer system. You know, you really care about keeping track of your photons, not losing them at coupling into fiber, and not losing them on the platform themselves. And OCT's really the same. I think from the layers of retina that we're imaging, you, for every billion photons you send in, you get 1 back. And obviously you're limited by how much power you can send into the eye. So actually, when you kind of deconstruct an OCT system, you end up measuring approximately 1 photon from the eye in any capture that you take. And so it's really, really important. The game is really save all those photons that come back from the eye. So actually, all of the techniques we had developed or worked on in Bristol and in the quantum area were directly applicable to OCT. And then there's more broad, general things as well. I think as a quantum person, you perhaps get when you're surrounded by other people doing quantum research, you forget that it's a highly technical area. And so, even just leading areas or groups in that space, or working within them, and also trying to disseminate quantum to other people and industry partners that you might be engaged with. Both of those skills are really very transferable to startups in particular. I spend probably 50% of my time disseminating something technical to either an investor or a new party or something. So those are really key skills, which I think quantum, obviously they're created in other areas, but I think quantum sometimes is particularly challenging in aspects of those things. So that's kind of the quantumness of the company in itself. Just an idea of where we're at now. So yeah, we're formed 3 years ago. We got funding just about a year and a half ago from a private equity fund, and since then we've done various things. So we now have a chip which is imaging retinal-like structures. So you get these things called retinal phantoms, and they're basically just mock-ups of eyes. And below is an image from a 50K plus OCT system, and above is an image from our Siloton chip, our first Siloton chip. So this is a work in progress to improve that image, but at least we're getting, you can see the layers structure from the back of the eye, and that's actually the key indicator that they use for a treat or no treat decision. On top of this, we have various software packages that we've developed in-house to take that image and actually be able to assist the clinician in making that diagnosis, I guess with a vision that at some point in time, it might be a completely standalone device where the clinician is actually removed from the process, and it's just it can kind of flag the disease progression itself without it requiring a clinical input, at least in the simpler cases. We're revenue generating, so we're looking at selling chips to once into those hospital grade systems. Actually, a manufacturer of those hospital grade systems is providing revenue to look at tailoring our system into theirs. 3 patents, some private equity, and then also some grants as well. So that's kind of idea of how we've got to where we are now. And maybe just as a final, just because I think it's really cool, and I'm aware there's lots of maybe scientists in the crowd. I think this is where, so I've spoken about AMD and the fact that we'd want to try and tackle that particular disease initially, but more broadly, why do we think the eye is quite an interesting area? So it's a pretty unique area of the body, the eye. It's the only place where you can directly image blood vessels, because there's a huge amount of blood supplied to the back of the eye, a bit of brain tissue. So there's the optic nerve, and that's pretty much, it's neurons. It's directly brain tissue, basically. And also all the visual disease stuff that you would image normally, the kind of light sensitive areas. So there's kind of key areas, key things you can image, which you can't image directly anywhere else, non-invasively. So people are increasingly interested in looking and using OCT to monitor more general health conditions. So, macular disease was this area that I spoke about that we're initially targeting, a huge number of people there. But also by imaging the optic nerve, there was a recent, I think that there's lots of work in this area, things like Parkinson's, MS, dementia can all be, at least there's initial indication that you can see signs that disease is developing before symptoms actually manifest themselves in the patient, and that's through changes in the retina around the optic disc. And actually, there was a recent study which you might have seen, because it's got a fairly good amount of press coverage. But actually, for Parkinson's disease, you can detect up to 7 years prior to the patient showing symptoms by using OCT. So it's a really exciting area. And of course, there's obviously all the blood vessels which you can directly image, and changes to those blood vessels are often indicative of changes to your cardiovascular or kidney health. And so actually it's a really interesting area of research, where people are saying, well, if you can get a decent scan of the back of the eye and maybe monitor it over time, maybe we can actually have it as a general early warning sign for people and how their general health is. And that's certainly an area that easier access to OCT helps with. So we think it's an area where we can really target once we've got maybe that first use case of the macular disease and the more solid use case of the visual health. So just some takeaways before I wrap up. So I think AMD and eye care in general is facing significant challenges, mostly through kind of access to diagnosis equipment and also sometimes in treatment. But it's a really exciting space for innovation in general. It's really, the machines are beautifully engineered and continue to be innovated on as time goes by. I think, work research skills and most importantly, I think people in quantum tech and quantum research can definitely have an impact in more general areas outside of quantum. And I guess an equivalent is maybe thinking about CERN and the creation of the World Wide Web and the like, and the kind of spin-off technologies that can have an impact outside of the direct area of focus. And maybe a final takeaway is, you don't, certainly this was holding me back making the dip initially, was that I didn't feel like I had a technology to spin out of the university from my research and from my background PhD, but it's certainly possible to do it without that. It helps to have IP, which you spin out, but it's certainly possible. And with that, I'd like to say, thanks, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. You mentioned a specific quantum fund. Are you at liberty to say which fund that was?
Yeah, so the fund is is called Quantum Exponential. We were actually, so Stuart is a very experienced VC, but it's actually a very new fund. So we were their first investment. But they're UK based. They're actually floated on an exchange. I forget which one, but I think they're one of two quantum focused VCs that I'm aware of, which operate in the UK at the moment. The other one is called Quantination.
Right. Okay. I kind of guessed, but I wanted to verify.
Yeah.
I guess maybe generally kind of, I mean, you've told the story, obviously yourself and Alistair and other colleagues there in the beginning of Siloton, but for the students in the audience, what you said, it sounded like you were thinking about spin-outs and entrepreneurship earlier on in your PhD, and what is it that made you make the leap? So as we said, you are now actually 100% Siloton, at least for the last year or so, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's mostly Alistair's fault. I will most of the blame on him. Yeah, I think so. I guess through the various systems in Bristol that were in place and events, I had quite a lot of exposure to either people doing startups or to industry and in general. And I think something that had always appealed to me was making something that you could see out in the world. I think I've spoken with various people while I've been in Siloton, but one of them has a chip that's in every PlayStation, and something like that just would be really great, and I think is a really valuable thing to have. It feels like you've definitely contributed to the world. So that was the motivation generally for being interested in industry in general, and then startups specifically. I think it was the initial reason, and actually a big reason why I continue to be involved, is it's really varied. I think you think research and PhDs are varied, but it really opens your horizons to a whole host of meetings. You'll have meetings with very different co-founders, people working in completely adjacent areas to you, right up to kind of highly technical meetings with this OEM, for example. So you learn a lot, and I think that's been the thing, along with the great team and the area in general of trying to help people that have this disease. I think that's been the main pull to keep me going, is that it's a continuously interesting area and learning experience, really.
Right. And I mean, you touched on this at several points in the talk, kind of what quantum can contribute to medtech. I mean, you've mentioned a few of the kind of aspects of quantum that fit well. I guess, can you speculate on the technical side a bit more? So obviously, for those who don't know, University of Bristol Quantum Photonics Group is world-class, and that's the program that Euan and Alistair came out of, but it's very focused on, there's a lot of quantum technologies, and quantum photonics is just one of them. So I'm asking you to leave your comfort zone a little bit now with your massively more experience in medtech than mine, can you speculate briefly on other areas of quantum tech that might overlap with medical?
Yeah, it's a really
Of
good
course,
question.
don't give us any ideas that you're starting another company on yet.
Right. Yeah. I guess that so there's a big, it's certainly in the UK, because there's quite a prominent startup in the area, but there's certainly growing interest in brain imaging using certain quantum techniques. So I think historically it's been squids, but now they look at like quantum transitions in gas cells and using those to actually get a much finer grain detail of brain activity, and using that to monitor brain conditions, neurological conditions. I think that's probably seen as directly a quantum tech, which is in the medical industry, and Circa Medical, I think, is the name of the startup there. So there certainly are really established quantum tech. I think other areas, which I guess is maybe moving more to where I came from, is kind of quantum imaging and like proper quantum sensing, and I think those areas are really interesting. The issue I see now having interface with industry, I think, is that the demonstrators are maybe still too they're not easy to interface with from a non-quantum industry perspective. So I spent a long time looking at squeeze light, and I think certainly actually there are elements of OCT where you certainly could find interest in applying those things, but they just wouldn't have the capacity to understand or know how to use those kind of light sources. So I think there's an element of still that the TRL within the quantum community and research community needs to be pushed up a bit just to help with that interface.
Right. And I mean, following on from that, are there examples, again, with your experience now, either examples or ideas of ways to strengthen that academia and industry interaction that you would need to kind of jump over that gap?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I think, I mean, with all of these things, like engaging with those people as soon as possible is and it's quite common that you don't find anything initially, or we've had lots of discussions with people we're engaged with, because in some sense the early Siloton was quite like a research activity, because we were starting up from scratch. It was really kind of a private research enterprise, and we'd get engaged with lots of people and not really have anything to offer them directly, but just understand how they think, what they think about, and what they care about. And then all of a sudden you start to paint this picture of these are the key issues or these are the common threads. I think, yeah, so it's just really speaking to people, and then the process of how you do that, I think, is either just through, it's surprising what cold calling and emailing and being persistent on LinkedIn can do in terms of getting in front of these people. Generally, often a no reply is just because they've got an inbox full of 20 emails an hour or whatever big industry gets. But yeah, and events, I guess, like the ones you're running, right? So I think just having a culture of open discussions and stuff with industry, I think really helps.
Great. Just a couple more from me, and then I'll open it up. So you mentioned the QTech program in Bristol, which I am familiar with as a kind of supporter. Certainly, Alistair went through it. Any other examples of resources like that, either in Bristol or the UK, that you know of that are helpful have been helpful for you, or that are helpful for people in starting up in the
so that there certainly are similar deep tech incubator programs. I'm not aware actually of any worldwide that are quantum specific in that space. I don't know if Pete, if you would know of any, but yeah, no. So there certainly are programs which are designed maybe with 6 months or 12 months of funding, usually access to some kind of network. Sometimes comes with a follow-on, commitment that you might be able to get some kind of seed funding from that fund itself. And sometimes those are run by private institutions. Sometimes they're run by things like, so we've just been involved with one in the Francis Crick Institute, which is a public institution in the UK, but has some interest in kind of promoting certain activity in certain areas. The QTech program, I think the key thing, So I could probably spend an hour moaning about why QTech didn't get refunded, because I think the most recent stat is a third of the UK quantum companies came out of this one program in Bristol, and have raised since about 60 or 80 million pounds, and over 100 jobs. So it was a hugely successful program, and I think the key element of that was that they gave, the network was really great, so the network of people they gave, but also they gave a year or sometimes a year plus of funding. And it takes a long time to kind of, that very early stage of startups takes a long time to really focus in on what's relevant and get the skills that you need. And so having that support and not having to worry about, paying the bills during that time, I think really was beneficial for Alistair and Ben. So two of our co-founders went through that program. I didn't go through it myself. I was just involved on the sideline while I was still in academia.
Any Innovate UK or any of these government schemes that you guys have benefited from?
Yeah, Innovate UK in general has been, so if you're I guess an out-and-out quantum company, there's been a huge amount of support, and actually a lot of the UK government's kind of flagship money to support quantum tech in general has been through Innovate UK. So it's been mostly the quantum hubs and Innovate UK. So there's been lots of quantum specific calls, which I think, if I think about all of the kind of quantum thoroughbred startups in Bristol, they've all got, large chunks from that. We have ourselves got a few Innovate UK grants, not quantum, just because of the nature of our business, but health tech stuff. There's also I forget, there's a NIHR, which I think is the National Institute of Health Research. So we get some grants through those, and some of those are really great because they're 100. So Innovate UK, you need to match fund with 20% private for the 80% Innovate UK. But some of the smaller grants we can get are actually 100% funded and pay up front, which from a cash flow perspective is beneficial. So yeah, we've benefited a lot. And I think now through QTech and other grants we've got, we've actually pretty much matched. We've kind of half and half. We've got half private investment and then half through grants. And I think we'd continue probably on that trajectory for the next few years, I think.
What would you change? What have been the challenges in the landscape or the ecosystem there? What has been hurtful?
Yeah, every week there's something that goes wrong, I guess. So there's a long list of stuff. Yesterday we this is just an anecdote, but we went to London for an interview, and there was a swan on the track that got hit by a train before, and we spent an hour and a half waiting for the RSPCA, the animal rescue, and we missed the interview. So that can happen. But things that I guess, yeah. So there's things that's been out of control. COVID and the current economic climate in terms of fundraising is very bad. So so those are two very significant things. COVID, actually, the nature of the company where we were, and the fact that we could do things like build the demonstrator at home and do things like that. In some sense, that helps us, because that's the kind of thing investors really like to see, that you're kind of really bootstrapping. I'd made my own polarization controllers out of cardboard, which I cut, and various other things. So it was really a chance to properly bootstrap in that sense, and I think that comes across well. Maybe not something I would change, but something that I think has pulled us through is having a really good and experienced team. So not only with Alistair and Ben being really committed, my co-founders, but Ian and Jane, two of our board members, basically committed a year free of charge, so pro bono, of work just to get the company off the ground. Yeah, finding good people and finding them early is really key.
Hi, my name is David. I'm from Degeneration Technology Group. So my question I want to ask you, Euan, is for the quantum computing at the moment, we don't have any physical computer to use, right? And then people do research, study, teaching on that. Like what else we can do when we want to learn about quantum computing and we don't have the physical machine yet?
Yeah, it's good question.
Good question for you.
Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah, I guess there are a few ways to go about it. There are, of course, lots of an increasing number of computers that you can at least access in some low level, I guess, yeah, various companies have platforms that you can engage with, and those usually include, you know, software simulators that then you interface with the hardware once you get to that point. And I know certainly of startups in Bristol, so quantum computing software startups, where that's a key area, a key activity for them is that they look and develop algorithms and then kind of actually implement them on hardware to see how they perform. I guess another area, if your industry focus is actually engaging with those companies. So I guess lots of the time, those applications and proving that you need or proving that quantum computing is useful for certain applications is a lot of work, but also maybe doesn't even require access to the computer. It can maybe be done in maths, and you get the likes of. So we've got Phasecraft in Bristol, who are a big quantum algorithms company, and I guess they're the kind of people you want to engage with if you're trying to find applications in those spaces.
I'll mention Q Control here in Sydney as well, who has a software platform now for learning more about quantum computing and stuff.
I guess I'm very novice to this whole area, but something I'm really struggling to understand is that how is it those big companies that they make those machines? Like, how is it you've come up with this before then?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I think there are a few things that play into this. One is that integrated photonics is still an emerging technology. It's been around for a long time, but really it's only actually reached maturity in terms of fabrication and access to fabrication, where people are starting to see it out in the real world. So the only real case where it's exploited currently commercially is in telecoms. And actually that's quite a different platform to the one we use from OCT anyway. So the technology still is fairly young, and therefore skills and knowledge in the area isn't super common. There's also an element that whilst the machines themselves they're really well engineered and they're really high performance machines, actually you'll find that pretty much every OCT system has the same camera, for example. They all buy from the same supplier. So actually lots of them are really just buying components off the shelf and putting them into system. It's more systems engineering than component engineering. And so actually they maybe don't have the capacity to kind of do that component development themselves, or the desire. I guess generally there's been a move in industry to not do that themselves, and just to look at startups and engage in startups and then acquire them as they come. That certainly seems to be a trend in OCT and other spaces.
Thanks a lot. Euan, my name is Irina Kubakova and I'm from UTS. So I actually have some experience in photonics integration and imaging.
Great.
So if I may ask you a few technical questions and try to pick a little bit more into quantum aspect of the company's technology.
Mm-hmm.
You alluded already that you're not trying to apply squeeze light or anything like that in your system. So what is it about just optimizing losses, or you also worked on a camera to reduce the noise levels, and what or you applied quantum algorithms? If you can expand a little bit more, that would be very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great question. So I guess there are a few areas. Some are more general. So one is, like for example, loss. So for an OCT system, you need very low loss, fiber to chip interfaces. And so in Bristol, we spent a long time thinking and researching and looking at those problems. So we're kind of well equipped to kind of understand how you would do that. And that there's kind of multiplies across the whole, low loss components, low reflection components, all of this kind of general managing of loss in your photons is kind of applicable. There's some more specific things. So my background actually is in, or at least my background just before spinning out, coming to Siloton was in quantum homodyne detection. So in balance detection for CV QKD, CV quantum stuff. And actually, it turns out that one of the flavors of OCT, a technique called swept source OCT, actually uses a balanced homodyne detector as one of its detectors. And actually, so the very last thing I did in research was make a chip which had 64 homodyne detectors on it, so multi-parallel homodyne detection. And actually, that's a key. That is one of the key areas that they're looking to develop generally for these swept source systems is kind of multi-parallel systems. So there's more actually direct, and the reason why that overlaps well again is because of this low photon. The reason they use those balance detectors are the same reason that they're used in quantum, in that you can take very weak signals and amplify them through this optical interference process. So yeah, there's kind of general, and there's a few more examples of those kind of specific examples as well, but yeah, there just seems to be, and this is by pure coincidence generally. We didn't know all of this before we started, but actually the more we got into it, the more it seemed that there were actually specific elements as well as a more general alignment of quantum and OCT.
Right. And maybe just to connect that to the previous question, the reason telecom doesn't care about loss is because they're just blasting lasers through these fibers. It's the quantum community that worries about these kinds of things, right?
Hi, Alex Danko from Medtech in Adelaide. Why you have 3 patents? You said one of them is granted. Are they on the technology or on the application?
They are on the how would I class that? So I guess it's more on the technology. So it's really on, so OCT in general has been used, at least for visual health, for about since the early 2000s. So the application's pretty well established. The patent, the first patent covers the technology, and really what it covers is, so the way OCT works is that it's like ultra sound. You shine light into somebody's eye and you time it to come back, but light travels really fast. So actually you need to actually have a reference. You race it against itself and then you interfere those beams as they come back. But it's important that the 2 paths have the same delay to them, because otherwise you don't get good interference. And so there's an element on the chip which is a tunable delay, and it actually covers a arrangement or a few arrangements and techniques around a tunable delay for a photonic chip, specifically for OCT, or kind of optimized for OCT. And the patent strategy and portfolio generally is kind of patenting areas or interfaces with the chip to make it prohibitively challenging, or to either make it completely challenging to get another OCT system on the chip itself, or to, if you are able to make an OCT, that it has much worse performance than our system. That's the general strategy.
Euan, my name's Ronak Raj. I'm from the University of New South Wales. I'm a PhD student currently. So PhD student, I'm actually interested to know, so I guess if I understand you correctly, you said that a lot of your work with Siloton, like you were able to kind of navigate IP issues by not having a significant overlap with your previous work at Bristol. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, so, I'm guessing there is, in terms of theory and then the kind of quantum optics and optics side of it, there'd be a little bit of overlap with publications you might have produced while at Bristol. So how was it that you were able to then kind of, isolate yourself from still being able to have new IP unique to Siloton?
It's a really good question, and it's another area that I could talk at length about, because the QTech program, I think at least once a year they would have somebody's company fail because of interactions with universities. Universities basically would be taking up so much equity, or would come with so much overhead in terms of other restrictions to the company, that actually they were uninvestable as a company. So it's an area which I have a few views on as well, and is in general an area of focus for the UK, I think, to understand actually whether they could do it better. So I guess most of the stuff we have taken, at least for now, from our interaction with the university, is the kind of skills and the understanding and the kind of more general area of development that we've got. And so I think our claim in general is actually that probably wouldn't be taking out IP out of the university, because lots of that was actually during our PhDs, where we own all the IP anyway during that process. My advice in general, so we went into it certainly because of QTech and the stories we had heard and the interactions we had with advisors there. We went into the process with our eyes open, and I do know of companies, I won't name them, but that have taken more direct IP from universities, and they've just been slightly smarter with how they kind of approach the situation. Maybe I think they've started up the company and then approached the university as an external party and asked to license the IP and things like that. So there are techniques maybe to maybe give yourself a bit more freedom, but yeah, in general, we actually haven't used any patents or anything really from publications. It's really been just kind of more general skill set and knowledge, which is how we've managed to not have to directly engage with the University of Bristol. We do work with the University of Bristol, and we have good relationship with them. So we haven't kind of stayed quiet in the corner of Bristol, away from the university. So they do know we exist and stuff. But yeah, so I think it was partly by design, because we didn't really have anything that could work from what we did in our university, but also it has been beneficial because it is viewed generally positive to have kind of not a huge institution sat on your share sheet, basically.
Hey, regarding communication, so when you're actually, this is more on the communication aspect between when you're talking about more quantum specific applications and bringing these quantum concepts to non-quantum fields, what are the specific strategies that you use specifically to facilitate communication with less quantum minded people? And how do you enable it? For example, in the medical field, many people don't really have a quantum vision of what's going on, right? So what, in terms of the specific strategies, how do you enable more easy communication regarding that? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Again, these are all great questions. Yeah, I guess one thing I flag, and I guess Pete would be surprised if I didn't mention this. So I did a huge amount of outreach when I was in Bristol and in general, and I think I continue to think it's one of the most important things I did, because even speaking, so explaining quantum to somebody from the general public is not too dissimilar from explaining quantum to somebody in industry. Like obviously it's quite specific, more specific, the industry focus, but actually the kind of general concept and getting across that is very similar. So I think one of the things in general I would advise is engaging with activities like general outreach and more specific, because I think it just naturally trains these skills. In terms of specific approaches that you can utilize when engaging with industry, things like cutting out, I think often writing down, say you're trying to explain a concept, writing it down and actually looking at it and looking at the jargon that's involved, and realizing that even words like state, for example, in quantum work, we talk about quantum states all the time. Like the idea of the state of a photon or something is not language which even people working in photonics might be familiar with. So actually really assessing the language you're using and stripping it back to get the same sentiment across, but in words that may be more familiar, I think is a great tactic. Sam Morley-Short, a colleague of mine from Bristol, I think you can get online, I forget what it's called now, but you can get online word checkers, which basically only allow you to use the top 100 or 200 most common English words. And you can try and see if you can describe your own research using those kind of things. And I think also understanding, one of the key areas is also understanding where they're coming from. So often starting the conversation by saying, what research have you done? What's your background? And it often just helps you find the level which is the right level for them. Because also, I guess you don't want to come in with a very general description of superposition when they're quantum optics researcher for 10 years or something. So yeah, those are two of the most important things, I think, in general.